The subject of today's video has one of the most sad stories from the 2023 NFL Draft. While at Syracuse, Sean Tucker was a back-to-back 1,000-yard rusher, was a first-team All-American, was a dark horse Heisman contender, and is probably the most underrated running back in college football over the last few years in my opinion. With a career like that, you would expect to get drafted pretty high into the NFL, but unfortunately, Sean Tucker got absolutely screwed. He ended up going undrafted, and it was because of one big problem that went on behind the scenes. In today's video, we're going to continue my What Happened To series, as we're going to take a look at Sean Tucker's career. We're going to talk about how he went from an unknown, low-ranked recruit to one of the best running backs in college football over the last few years, and then what happened behind the scenes that made him go undrafted. But it won't all be negative, as there is a chance he'll be able to play by the time this August rolls around, and honestly, in that case, he could end up being a complete steal for an undrafted player. But before we get started, quickly be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could cover next. Now, let's get started and talk about the tragedy of Sean Tucker. So in order to understand how Tucker got to this point, we first need to go back in time. At an early age, he had a love for football, and he had complete support from his parents. He said, quote, "My dad was training me since I was 6. Him always being in my ear and just trying to keep me motivated to do what I want to do to get to the highest level." Tucker had been running the ball since he started playing football at 6 years old, and speed was, quote, Tucker's God-given attribute. His son had been dedicated to becoming the best football player he could be since he was 6, and for much of his youth, he'd play both indoor and outdoor football to hone his skills. They traveled around to find the best competition, and eventually, a JV coach for Calvert Hall High School began to recruit Tucker when he was in middle school. He noticed him at a youth game, and before high school, his dad originally wanted him to attend St. Francis Academy in Baltimore, but with a new coaching staff, he wanted his son to play for a more established staff, so he went to Calvert Hall School and would quickly be talked about as the next great athlete there. When he arrived, his friend said, quote, "When he first started running at Calvert Hall, he had speed, but the talent was raw." Tucker was actually supposed to play defensive back for him, but after his freshman season was over, he made the move to running back, and the speed would really help him with that. Apparently, he was given many opportunities to play running back in practice, but he always questioned why he had to play it, and he didn't want to. He would finally enter the fold as a sophomore, as one of their top running backs would get injured, and in that next game, Tucker would score his first touchdown, and eventually became running back 1. His coach said, quote, "I remember thinking, of course you should have been a running back, have you seen how fast you are?" After that week, everyone knew what I knew, and he was our star running back. He was a doubted player, so how is this doubted player going to make his way to the top of college football? Well, he took all aspects of the game very seriously, as he ran sprints as a supplement to his game, and he took conditioning, strength training, timing, and relays extremely seriously. It ended up working out for him, and was, quote, called a natural bullet. He did nothing but get faster since his freshman year, and as a sophomore, he'd defeat future Maryland wide receiver DeJuan Ellis to win the state championship in a sprinting event, and this meant he was one of the top track runners on the East Coast, thus in the entire country. He said that the mental side of track actually was the most valuable, which helped him become the player he is now. Following his breakout sophomore year, he attended a football camp at Bowie State, which attracted coaches from all over the country. He ran a 4.27 40-yard dash, and coaches saw his speed and the ability to break off 80-yard touchdown runs, so eventually he got offers. He went on to become a superstar over his last 2 years, as he rushed for 1,500 yards and 14 touchdowns as a junior, and then had 1,200 yards and 14 touchdowns as a senior. He was extremely underrated, and he played some really good competition, which brought the best out of him. So, where would he end up going? Well, despite insane speed and stats, he was only your average 3-star recruit, and ended up committing to Syracuse over offers from Air Force, Kent State, Rutgers, and Wisconsin, with interest from Penn State coming. Syracuse was his first Power 5 offer, and this was a huge deal and made everything become reality for Sean. His dad said, quote, "The first one was important, and that was a really good experience. No matter how good you think he is, or how good other people think he is, it really doesn't sink in until you actually get some offers." I guess Syracuse's tight end / receivers coach worked at Towson before he came to Syracuse, and had earned the trust of the Calvert Hall staff, and they tipped him off to Tucker's potential, and this would pay dividends as Tucker became one of the first commits in Syracuse's class, and he was doubted but didn't really care. His dad said, quote, "He didn't have a big name or anything, but that definitely fueled him. You don't know who he is, but he'll come and pop you in the mouth." That was the kind of thing he did, as he just kept his head down and worked. What's interesting is he had better stats than the 2 running backs in the state that were ranked higher than him, but that wasn't going to matter. According to 24/7 Sports, Sean Tucker was a 3-star recruit, the number 58 running back, and the 867th best player in the class of 2020. No one was talking about this guy, but how would the speedster do at Syracuse? When Tucker arrived at Syracuse, he came under the assumption that he would probably redshirt, but then Syracuse's top 2 projected running backs both opted out of the season. Tucker would end up having a pretty insane year, as in his second game, he'd run for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns in a win over Georgia Tech, had over 100 yards in a loss to Liberty, had a touchdown against Clemson, and then also had over 100 yards and a touchdown against Notre Dame. He became the first Syracuse freshman to run for over 100 yards against an FBS opponent since 2008. He finished with 626 yards and 4 touchdowns and was immediately praised as the guy of the future for them. 2021 is when Tucker would go absolutely insane. He went for 181 yards and a touchdown against Ohio in Week 1, and besides a 54-yard performance against Rutgers, he then went berserk. He had over 100 yards against Albany, nearly 200 yards against Liberty, over 100 yards against Florida State, 153 yards and 2 touchdowns against Wake Forest, 157 yards against Clemson, 112 yards against Virginia Tech, and 207 yards against Boston College. It's also worth noting he had 4 touchdowns in that game against Albany and scored in almost every outing. He fell just under the 100-yard mark against Louisville before one more 100-yard mark game against number 20 NC State. He finished the year with a disappointing performance against Pitt, but Tucker had an insane season. He finished with 1,496 yards and 12 touchdowns. That ended up being the most rushing yards in a single season in Syracuse history, and he was named a first-team All-American. He couldn't go off to the NFL because he was only a sophomore, but there was a lot of hype for him going into 2022. He was listed as a dark horse Heisman candidate, but being at Syracuse, the odds were very slim, and he would somehow have to improve on last year to even get in that conversation. How would he end up doing? Well, he was pretty good. He had back-to-back 100-yard games to start out against Louisville and UConn, before he had a career game on the first weekend of October. Against Wagner, he went for 232 yards and 3 touchdowns, and then the following week would help them upset NC State with a touchdown. At this point, Syracuse was 6-0, and after this blazing start, they were one of the Cinderella stories of the 2022 season. Unfortunately, the brakes would fall off, and part of that can probably be blamed on Tucker. In that 5-game losing streak for the Orange, Tucker only went over 100 yards once and was extremely disappointing. I can't seem to find any information about whether he was injured or not, and if he was, he gets a pass, but if not, that shows how big of an impact Tucker had on his program. He would end up finishing the year strong though, with 106 yards and 2 touchdowns against Wake Forest, and then 125 yards and 2 touchdowns against Boston College. This would get Syracuse to a 7-5 record before he'd opt out of their bowl game. He finished with 1,060 yards and 11 touchdowns, and while it was a somewhat disappointing season for him, he still wasn't a 1,000-yard back and was one of the top playmakers in the entire country. He said, quote, "It's always been a dream of mine to play in the NFL since I was in elementary school. In the 5th grade, my dad committed to getting me there, and we've been on a mission ever since. Today, we move another step closer, and I'm happy to announce I'll be entering the 2023 NFL Draft." In total, Tucker played in 33 games, where he rushed for 3,182 yards, 27 touchdowns, and also had 64 catches for 622 yards and 4 scores. He finished 3rd in Syracuse history in rushing yards per game, and was the first player in program history to have back-to-back seasons with over 1,000 yards and 250 receiving yards. While it was looking good on paper, bad stuff was going on behind the scenes. He was originally not medically cleared to participate in the NFL Draft Combine, as apparently there was an unreleased medical situation, and while eventually he was able to perform at the Orange's Pro Day, this whole situation did enough damage to scare off Scout. He ended up going undrafted and would have to sign with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as an undrafted free agent. At times, he was projected as a mid-round pick, but would end up not hearing his name called at all. Apparently, he had a congenital heart condition, and that stuff is always very scary, and this caused his dream to not happen. He did everything right on the football field to hear his name called, but unfortunately, luck was not on his side, and now he's gonna have to really fight to get back at it. Some say being a free agent may have been a better outcome for him though, as he got the 3rd most guaranteed money of any undrafted free agent, and went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who some say has the worst backfield in the league. If Tucker can figure it out and get cleared to play, then he should have a chance to make the roster. Right now, it looks like he's going to be back for training camp, and the Buccaneers seemingly want to give him a shot. From all the information I've read, it looks like he has a legitimate chance at making it to the NFL, but the big question is, will he be healthy and will he get his chance? That, I don't know. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you did, be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.